Hi everyone, it's Monica and welcome back to Taylor-Made Cards for You. Well, it's day 5 of my 7 Days of Halloween series, and today we're going to do something a little bit more difficult. Yesterday we made some really easy Halloween cards, but today I'm going to show you how to make texture for some of those more cards that, well, just kind of grab you, right? So I am using translucent grit paste, and this is actually the first time that I've used this, and I love it. I think it makes great texture and it really absorbs color. Now on my first card that I shared with you, I just used the brick wall and I colored it using the mica stain Iron Gate, which is awesome. But this time I wanted to go ahead and try to use a couple of stencils. I wanted to use a brick wall background, but then I wanted to use a stencil that looked more like cobblestone, so that way when my mummy was breaking through his wall, he would have something to step onto. So the first thing that I did is I cut down some watercolor paper, because you're going to be adding texture onto this paper, and you want to make sure that you have a surface that it's going to be able to sustain it. And what I mean by that is texture and moisture really adds some weight to your card. So you want to make sure that you're starting out with some heavy cardstock to begin with. Now, I always like to use watercolor paper when I'm working with mixed media product. It really holds itself together, and I like the surface, which really helps for the medium to grab onto. So using a plastic palette knife, I generously added some of my grit paste onto my stencil. Now, I didn't have to use any special adhesive to hold down my stencils. I didn't have to add a double-sided tape to the back of my paper to hold it to my surface. I simply used the tools that I had on my hand, and those were my fingers. Those are the least expensive tools out there, and I'd rather spend my money on items that are going to really make your cards pop. The grit paste was awesome. I didn't find it was too expensive, and it really makes a difference. And you're going to find through this video, I'm hoping you're going to love it as much as I do, because I am in love with this product. All right, so I generously added the grit paste through my stencil, and then once I had all of it covered, I went ahead and I did a swipe to kind of, get rid of some of the excess grit paste. And then once I had a smooth surface, then I took the bottom of my palette knife and I just started tapping against the grit paste, and that created texture for me. Now, once I was done with that, I did put it aside to dry before I actually started adding the cobblestone. Now, I guess you could certainly use a heating tool, but I find that air drying some of this medium is the best way to go. At the end, because I didn't want to wait too long to actually tape this video, I did use a heating tool towards it, and it worked fine. So now that I have a dry surface, I went ahead and I brought out my mica stain. And the color that I'm using is Iron Gate. And while many people may not get too excited about this color, I think it's quickly becoming my favorite color of the 3 colors I picked up this year. This mica stain is awesome. In a lot of my videos, you've seen that I don't use a lot of sprays just because of the mess that it creates. So I'm really trying to control the splatter on these sprays, because I really like the results that I'm getting. And then I have a nice towel that I have right next to me to clean up my surface really quickly. All right, so as you can see, it's a pretty stunning result, right? I mean, and this is just spraying it with a few spritzes of that mica stain. Now, in some of the areas, I went lighter than darker because I wanted to have some shadows. And it's easy to accomplish this result using your mica stain, so just play a little bit with it. All right, now it's time to bring out our character, and this is the mummy, of course. Now, this mummy isn't the one from Tim Holtz. I went back and forth with that stamp set. I was going to buy it, but the only thing I really wanted out of it was the mummy, and I decided I really didn't want to spend the extra money just to get the mummy stamp. So I went ahead and I found a digital mummy that I was able to color up and size down, and it worked perfect for me. So I think you could probably do this with Tim's mummy stamp out there. You would just have to stamp it and color it and then cut it up, but I went digital this time. So the first thing that I did is I kind of sized up the mummy to figure out exactly where I was going to have him popping through the brick wall. And then using my my little knife, my little tool here, I'm going to go ahead and cut out some of those brick walls. Now, this is the second card that I created using this technique. And the first time that I did it, I didn't actually spray the mica, and this time I did spray the mica. So if you don't want to have all the mess on your fingers, you could easily trim this before you actually spray your distressed mica stain. You're going to find it probably will be just about the same, especially if you do give it drying time. But if you don't want to have to risk getting your fingers all dirty, then you can easily cut it before you do your spraying. Now, this is going to take a little bit of finessing. When you have your mummy popping through, you got to figure out exactly what part you want to have popping through the wall and what part you want to have on the background. The way that I wanted to do it is I wanted to have his head, of course, and then one of his arms, and then one of his feet popping through. But I didn't want to have it look like just a big hole in the brick wall. I wanted it to look like he was breaking through. So I had to be somewhat strategic when I picked which bricks I was going to cut out. You also want to kind of take into consideration how far up your mummy's going to be, because remember, you're going to have his arms that kind of stop you from going down too far. So you want to kind of take that into consideration as well. Now, when you're taking your bricks out of your paper, don't feel like you have to be very precise, because again, this is a mummy breaking through a wall. So you want some of the edges to be a little bit jagged. You could even tear some of the paper if you wanted to. Just have some fun with it. All right, so once you have the pieces cut up, you want to definitely try it out with your mummy. Make sure everything is coming through the way you want it to be. It's going to take you a few tries to figure this out. So I would recommend that the paper that you're using is somewhat flexible. You don't want it to be too rigid that you can't get your pieces of the mummy through the brick wall. So just kind of keep that in mind when you go to pick your cardstock for your image. Now, I'm using a mummy, but you can certainly use a Frankenstein. You can use any type of monster breaking through a wall. I just decided to go with the mummy because I found, like I said, this really cute image. But there's a lot of ways that you can use this design. All right, so once I've figured out that my mummy fits through the pieces that I've cut, I want to go ahead and just dress up some of the edges. Now, ordinarily, I would use my black soot distress crayon, but I'm going to show you that in a minute. That pretty much is coming to the end of its life, and I'm going to have to determine if I want to go ahead and invest in a 3-set, because the crayons don't come individually anymore. I'm not sure if you were aware of that, but they only come in sets. So I have to determine if that's the way I want to go, just to get my black soot, but that's for another day. So I decided to go ahead and pull out the gray to do some of the coloring. And I don't remember specifically what this color was, but I just kind of picked some colors that I thought would look good to distress up the edges. As you can see here, this is my black soot, and it's coming to the end of its life. But I had a little bit of color left in it, so I'm grabbing as much out of it as I can. And as you can see, I'm just kind of coloring over the edges of the holes in the wall just to kind of make it blend in and make it look part of the wall. I like the part of the hole to be a little bit darker, and you're going to see in a minute here, I'm going to come in with some more of my mica stain as well, just to kind of emphasize the pieces that are outside of the wall. All right, so let's bring back our mummy. Now, the mummy has some white space around it because I did use my scan and cut to cut these out, and it worked perfectly. But I wanted to go ahead and add some color to the edging, so I'm adding probably walnut stain. It might be vintage photo. I can't remember exactly what color I used, but basically I just got some browns, and I distressed the edge of my mummy. And now I'm going to go ahead and put this guy through that brick wall, taking care to add him easily because this is going to be where I'm going to glue him down. All right, so once I get that mummy in place, then I'm going to add my adhesive. And the adhesive that I'm using is my 3-in-1 beacon, which is my liquid glue. So when you are cutting out part of the brick wall, you want to make sure that you do still have some surface on the back side of that mummy that he can adhere to. You don't want to cut those holes too big where you don't have anything to glue him down. I mean, some of you might be thinking, why am I fussing so much with this mummy? I probably could have cut a bigger hole, but I definitely wanted to still have some surface behind him. Plus, I did really want to make it as realistic as possible. All right, now as you can see, I have some extra brick pieces on the side of my card here, and I didn't throw this out intentionally. The first time I made this card, I didn't add any of the brick pieces, but I decided for the second card, I wanted to go ahead and add some of those brick pieces back onto the wall to make it just a little bit more texture and give it a little bit more of a 3D effect. And then once I added those pieces back onto the brick wall, I did end up adding some more of that black soot crayon just around the edges to give it somewhat of a shadow. All right, so now that we have our mummy in place, we're going to go ahead and distress the edges. And I'm using my tonic distressing tool to just edge up the paper. Watercolor paper distresses really well with this tool just because of the thickness and the texture of it. So I love using this tool on my watercolor paper. And then at this point, I would have gone to my black soot crayon, but that again is coming to the end of its life. So I had to find another color, and that's me rummaging through my crayon box to try to figure out what color I'm going to use. I think ultimately I ended up using Vintage Photo, I want to say. I was rummaging through looking for walnut stain, but it didn't appear that I had that. So it looks like I actually pulled out the gray first, and then ultimately I ended up going with Vintage Photo because I wanted to have a little bit more of a darker edge. Now, if you've never worked with mixed media products, some of this grit paste, distressed crayons, even some of the inks, it does get a little messy. So you're going to see here that my fingers are getting really grungy and really dirty. And one of the things you're going to want to be careful of is when you actually go to add your photo or your image onto your white cardstock, you're going to want to make sure that your surface you've been working on is really clean, and of course that you wash your hands really well as before you start working with your white cardstock. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to put my image onto some white cardstock and I end up grunging up the base of my card. So that's one thing that I've learned is before I actually go to add it onto any of my white cardstock, I clean up my area thoroughly, I wash my hands, and I make sure I'm starting out with a nice clean surface. All right, so as you can see, this card is really coming together. I've got the outline with my Vintage Photo. I've got my mummy breaking through, and I'm just adding a few final effects. I keep trying to bring in that black soot distress crayon, and I think I need to probably just accept the realization that I'm going to have to toss it, but I just can't bear to part with it. It's one of my favorite crayons, but I think I'm going to have to probably toss it after this video because it really is on its last life. All right, so now that we have our mummy in place, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to glue my panel onto some black cardstock. This is just going to give it a little bit more sturdiness. It will give my mummy something to adhere onto, and it will just really finish off the border of this card. And then once I have this card glued down, I am going to add some blood splatters, and I'm going to be using my Festive Berries Distress Stain. This Distress Stain is pretty old and it still has the felt tip on it. A lot of Tim's Distress Stains now come in spray, but I got these when they were being discontinued, and I have the whole color palette, which makes me very happy because it makes some wonderful blood stains. So I've got that on, and then I'm going to go ahead and just once again take my heating tool to just give it one more once over just to kind of dry it a little bit, hold down some of those mummy pieces that are coming through the wall just to make sure they're stuck together. And then as a final note, what I typically do with some of my heavier cardstocks, things that have a little bit of weight, I like to add brads to my layers just to make sure they're going to stay in place. Sometimes when you are working with heavier cardstock, they may not want to grip their layers very easily. So just to be safe, I do add my brads. All right, so before I finish this card, I want to remind you that this is a 7-day series, and I will have another video for you tomorrow. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and that you have hit the subscribe button so that way you are notified when the video does come up. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate the support. Now, also, I will be doing a giveaway at the end of this series, so I would love to have a comment below in the description box, and let me know what is your favorite craft item that you can't live without. Throughout this video, I kept talking about my black soot distress crayon and how I love it, and I just can't bear to part with it. And I would love to hear if you have a tool or a craft product that you do the same. You just, you use it till it's almost gone. You're shaking it, try to get as much out of it as possible because you don't want to have to part with it. And I'd be curious to know what that product is of yours. So as I add the brads, I'm going to go ahead and finish this off with a sentiment on the bottom of the card. And these are those word chips that Tim came out with a few seasons ago. You can't actually get the box of these black word chips anymore, which really makes me sad. And I have been hoarding these, but I'm finally starting to use them on some of my projects. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this off here. And then as a final touch, I'm going to add some blood to that sentiment that says lost in the darkness. And then as a reminder, I am going to have these cards up in my shop. So if you are interested in them, be sure to check out the shop and I'll leave a link below. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for stopping by and we'll see you again tomorrow.